Okay, and hello, good morning to those of you in the morning part of the world, and also good afternoon, good evening to those of you in other parts of the world. I'm Tad. I will be here for the next hour. I'm going to read. I might juggle. I might not juggle. Anyway, good to see you. Nice to be here. What I am going to definitely be doing is reading from the Witchwood Crown, especially because I don't have a lot to say. I'm back to kind of a semi normal mode in terms of work, in that I'm actually doing some writing now and then. Um, the risks and those problems are not particularly bad at the moment, so that's not the reason I occasionally have trouble writing. It's more because we're doing a lot of other complicated stuff, and it's split between um, where we're living at the moment and our house that we're going to move back into. But we took advantage of our absence from that house to start a kitchen remodel that we've been wanting to do for, well, since we first moved into the place in 2011. A loathsome, loathsome kitchen. Otherwise, a really interesting, nice house that we're very fond of because it's octagonal. And it's the kind of thing that we like because it's slightly odd, as is our entire family, our pets, our way of life, virtually everything. So, octagonal house fits in fine. But the kitchen was always ghastly. We hated the kitchen. The kitchen was very much a 1970s thing, and you can see that it's kind of the whole conception of it was from the pre 1970s era when the kitchen was like sort of an isolation booth for the woman in the family generally. And it was very weird and closed off and hemmed in and all of that stuff. And we kind of, over the years, we've broken out a few bits and taken out some things and stuff, but we've never really been happy with it. So we're finally in the process of doing it over. And us being who we are, it's not like we're putting in a bunch of fancy stuff. If anything, we're kind of maybe making it less intricate. Is that the word I want? Not really, no. But so we're just trying to make it a place that we're more comfortable in, and it's open more to the rest of the house because the house is very open plan. That's how it was built. It's a strange, strange house. Maybe when we move in there, back there someday, I'll take you guys for an inside tour when we get our art hung back up, because art is a big part of what we like the house for. It's got big walls, and we have some big pictures. Back in a period of time when we actually had some money, Deb and I used to buy art. Not with the idea of investing or anything like that, but just we bought things that we liked. And some of them are fairly large, and you can only hang them up. And I mean, one of them we actually, when we thought we were renting the house, up until a few months back, we actually had to leave one of the pictures on the wall because it was just too damn big to take down. So it's still there, still sitting on the wall. Those who have been to the house can tell you it's a monstrously large picture. Very nice one, though. As I mentioned, it's we collect the work of two very different artists who happen to be married to each other. This one behind me is the Fafnir by Paul Story, but the gigantic picture is a landscape by his wife Rose Warnock. And as I said, it's like 8 by 8 feet or 9 by 9 feet. I can't remember. I actually framed it myself, which was one of the most insane things I've ever done. So anyway, so that's one of the reasons I'm not getting as much writing done as I would like. But fortunately, it's not particularly the wrist problems anymore. But I am working on various things, but especially at the moment on the Ordinary Farm, third volume of Ordinary Farm. And got a bunch of other stuff I'm supposed to be doing, including a whole bunch of pages for the edition of the Dragonbone Chair that Sean Speakman is producing with art by Donato, just like the Tailchaser song. So that's something else. I'm supposed to be signing signature pages for that too, and I've got a whole box of the things that are sitting there waiting for me, and life keeps getting in the way. But that is the nature of life, as I have mused about before. Anyway, so my darlings and hamburgers, what else is there to tell you about? Not really anything I can think of right at the moment. Deb's well. Most of our young people are all fine. I say most because one of them is in Minnesota at the moment, so we assume, but we don't know for certain because Minnesota is far, far away. Not because it's primitive or anything. I actually like Minnesota quite a bit. Anyway, so let me just see who's checked in here so far, and that will give us an idea. So let me say quick hellos to Isaac. Hello, Isaac. Ilva. Hello, darling. Good to see you. Dirk. Hello, Dirk. Iris and Hazel, my mother-in-law, Hazel Beal. As you can tell by the last name, she has the same last name as my wife, Deborah Beal. Anyway, hi, Hazel. Good to see you, sweetie. Your wife is fine. Your daughter, my wife, is fine. We went over and saw your granddaughter, one of your many granddaughters, tonight, and she's fine too. Sandra, hello, good to see you. Kristen, a pleasure. Jeremy, as always, good to see you. Maria Jose, also good to see you. Rosalba, thank you for showing up. Wouter, Suzanne, hi Suzanne, hi Wouter. Mark, there's Mark. Hello, Mark. Hope things are nice in Yorkshire. Oops, it's slipping upward here. Who else is go? I don't want to see the start page. Go away. Take that stupid little prompt away. Oh, God, help me. No, I don't want to delete that comment. I don't want to do anything with a comment. And now, before I finished reading the thing off, it has now decided it's going to spin for a while. So, hello, Christy. Good to see you. And let me see if I've got comments yet. No, it's still just spinning. I want to kill sometimes. Not a person, but certainly this particular interface. Facebook drives me mad. But then again, most social media drives me mad in some way or another. Anyway, I see also I've got Janice Hampson is checking in. Janice Ann. Hello, Janice Ann. Good to see you. And Nikki Grinnell. Hello. Good to see you. And Suzanne, if I didn't say hello to you before, hello. Good to see you. And the comments thing is still spinning, so I can't finish the list of people that I was reading from because it just arbitrarily does things. Oh, I see Maria Jose is here. Oh, God, stop spinning. I will spin you, you ning. Oh, God. No, it's still spinning. It does not want to tell me who's commented. Oh, my lordy. Anyway, so did I mention that Facebook is my sworn enemy and it's trying to kill me? If I didn't, I'll mention it now. Facebook is trying to kill me. It's been trying to kill me for years. I feel the way about it that just pretty much anybody might feel about, say, like a fox who kept getting into its hen house and killing its hens. No matter what I do, it seems to be like, hey, let's find another way to keep Tad from being able to see who's commenting and, making it difficult in 450 different ways. But I am bloody but unbowed, and I will not give up. So anyway, hey, and my microphone's on. That's a good start. It's always worth checking, I find. And no, it still won't give me comments. It's still going spinny, spinny, spin. That just makes no sense whatsoever. Yeah, no, it's just not going to do it. Okay, forget it. I'm not even going to worry about it anymore. Let me think. Anything else to say? No, we're sliding downhill into the holidays. I have bought no presents for anybody, including my wife, whose birthday is coming up. No, that's not true. I got her one thing so far. But this is particularly difficult because I have a long tradition of buying several presents for Deborah's birthday and then several more for Christmas. So I'm going to have to get on the good foot and get moving on that stuff. We are waiting on various things, and so while waiting, we're just trying to occupy ourselves as best we can. I have no other useful news to pass along to you. If or when I do, I will certainly let you all know. Yeah, no, I can't think of anything else at the moment. So, And since it won't resolutely will not let me see who is commenting and etc., etc. No, it's still doing that. It's just basically decided it will not show me any of the comments. I don't know why. Um, just to irritate me. I mean, I really that's the only conclusion I can come to at this point is that there's somebody at Facebook who's in the special office for annoying Tad, and they are really good at it. They're really, I mean, kudos if that's in fact what happened. If Facebook has arranged a corner office for somebody whose only job is to come in every day and go, what can I do to completely diminish Tad's Facebook experience today? How can I just stick a pin into his readings? How can I make him foam and fume and froth with fury, to alliterate just a wee bit? And whoever you are, mystery Facebook employee, you're doing a darn good job. And you seem to find a different way to do it every week, which is one of the things that I really have to admire. You're not just running out the same old hits, like some dinosaur rock band at a state fair. You are coming up with new and original ways to piss me off every week. So good for you. Anyway, okay, well, with that said, and with my nose itching like crazy, I am going to just start reading. And that is what I'm going to do because I don't really, as I said, I don't have a whole lot to say. And I am going to read. That's simple fact. So again, apologies for not being able to say hello to people one last try. No, it will not let me. I'm just getting a little black square with a little spinny thing every time I try and hit the comments to see who might have commented. And it's doing the same thing on the comments. Yeah, everywhere. It's just doing it on purpose. And I know that now. And perhaps that will allow me to come to terms with it. The knowledge that it's just a fact of life. Facebook hates me. I don't know what I did. I don't know what I did to upset Mrs. Facebook's baby boy or girl or the entire workforce there. I really don't know. Anyway, enough. Okay, so we are reading from The Witchwood Crown, which of course is the first book of the return to Ostenard in a sense, but it's also not, because there was the short novel that came before it, which is really kind of the bridge, the heart of what was lost. But it's the first big book and puts all the characters together, introduces the new characters, introduces all the many important old characters who were not in the bridge volume. Excuse me. So that is what I am going to do, is read from The Witchwood Crown. So Morgan, the grandson of Simon and Miriamel, the somewhat feckless grandson, another one of those words like ruthless and several others that has lost its positive meaning, and now all you hear is the negative meaning. So you don't hear about people being feckful very often any more than you hear about them being ruthful, although you occasionally hear Ruth used just as a noun. He was full of Ruth, but even that is quite archaic. Anyway, Morgan, the feckless grandson, who has been out drinking on the day of his Dukas Grimner's funeral, has just gone out to pee against the wall in front of this Rimmersgard pub that they're visiting, he and his cronies. And Binnabik, Simon's dearest friend, Binnabik has just come up to him and has introduced him to his daughter and her betrothed. The daughter's name is Kina, spelled Qina, and the betrothed is Little Snenek, who is actually quite large for a troll. And then Binnabik has basically done something even more treacherous, which is that he has stuck Morgan with Little Snenek, because Little Snenek doesn't want to go back to the castle with the other two. So anyway, So Morgan is being handed all this hello and whatnot, and then Benedict and his daughter have just walked off. And well, let me go back just a tiny, tiny little bit. Escape impossible, and all other resistance now thoroughly dismantled. Morgan could only wait as the young troll woman rubbed cheeks with her betrothed, then followed her father back down the long street in the direction of Elvertsala Castle, the massive white wolf pacing beside them. Loiterers who might otherwise have been calling abuse at the trolls took one look at Vakana and slipped away. Morgan was not entirely certain what had just happened, but he was already wishing it hadn't. "And so we will entertain ourselves like true Rimmersgarders now, eh?" announced his new companion, his grin so wide it seemed to squeeze his eyes shut. "The prince and little Snenek bring out ale and stinking fish." Then, as they made their way back inside, the troll suddenly said, "My someday father-in-law is a very good man." The prince did not reply. Most of the alehouse denizens had looked up when they pushed open the squeaking door, and many of them looked displeased by his new companion. "Because I told him it was needed for you and I to meet," the troll went on. "I am going to help you, you see." "Help me? By the love of all the saints," Morgan wondered. How far back into this poxy place were his friends sitting? Surely he hadn't traveled such a distance on the way out. "How are you going to help me?" "As I told my father-in-law to be, the singing man Benedict, I will help you to find your destiny, just as he was doing for your illustrious grandsire, the King Sailman." The prince made a firm decision to ignore everything this little moon-mad creature said from that point onward. Also, his grandfather's tiny friend Bennywick had deliberately picked Morgan out for this suffering, and he would neither forget nor forgive. Oliveris was right, he thought. Little people can't be trusted. "And who is your new companion?" asked Porto, when Morgan finally discovered the table in the opposite dark corner from the one in which he'd been searching. The old knight squinted. "He has not the look of the Rimmersgarders I've seen. One of their country cousins from up north." "This is," Morgan couldn't precisely remember, "Snowneck. Or is it No-neck?" "Snenek," the troll said. "Little Snenek they are calling me, because it was also the name of my father and grandfather." Astrian was plainly delighted to meet someone shorter than he was. "No-neck it is. And what will you have to drink, Sir No-neck? Some milk, perhaps, with a bit of bread dipped in it to suck upon." Snenek smiled a polite, yellow-toothed smile. "Not a child. I am Canuck." "No-neck, the Canuck," Astrian crowed. "You must join our merry band." Even Olveres grinned at that. But not everyone in the dim alehouse was as happy. Morgan could hear more than a few angry words from the surrounding tables about the troll's presence. "They think they can go anywhere," someone complained. "Why am I lumbered with this little goblin?" Morgan wondered. "Probably get me beaten half to death by these bearded ice bears." He couldn't completely remember what other wrongs had been done to him today, but he felt certain that this was only the most recent of many. "Give him something to drink, Porto, and for God's sakes be quick." The old knight poured a bowl for the new arrival, but stared at little Snenek so intently that he spilled more than he poured. Sir Olveris watched mournfully as it puddled on the splintered table. "I've seen your kind," Porto said at last as he pushed the ale towards Snenek. "Trolls! Your folk met us on the road back from Nakiga." It was obvious many people in the alehouse were listening, because a fresh round of whispers began at this word, although not so obviously hostile this time. Snenick nodded. "True. Our herder and huntress had sent them to help in the fighting against the Hikidaya, but they came after the siege was ending." "Hikkadikadik, says no neck from Ikanek," said Astrian a bit too loudly. He was unusually drunk. "And why would they send such as you to fight the Norns?" Little Snenick looked at him and smiled again, although it vanished more quickly this time. "Never doubt them," said Porto, the fumes of reminiscence beginning to rise from him. "The little troll men fought fiercely in Erkenland. I saw them there, in battle." Olverus rolled his eyes, but Astrian sat forward. "Truly?" he asked. "Did they run among the white foxes, kicking their shins? Or perhaps hid in the Norn saddlebags, and then sprang out to attack?" "I made that joke about you, Astrian," Morgan complained. "About kicking the shins of your enemies. That's mine." "Ah, but about me, it is merely comic exaggeration," the knight said. "My question to this fellow is an honest one." "There were times that the winds blew so hard, and the snows fell so thickly on the Hayholt from the Storm King's magic, that we could see nothing," Porto said, ignoring Astrian and warming to his tale. "But those little fellows, well, they could find their way through anything." "Then why can't they find their way back to the place they came from?" brayed a very large bearded rimmersman at a nearby table. His friends laughed loudly, toasting him with their slopping bowls. "We have no need of them here." Little Snenick smiled again, but there was something quite different in it this time, a certain hardness to his eyes that Morgan recognized. Astrian got that look sometimes when he was in his cups and angry. Morgan's grandfather, Simon, wore it sometimes as well, usually when someone spoke about the strong taking cruel advantage of the weak. Morgan was suddenly wondering whether it might be time for their little party to move on. The big bearded man was sitting down. Little Snenick waited patiently at the man's elbow until he was noticed. "What do you want?" the red-faced man demanded. He put down his bowl, his fingers already curling into fists. "I am hoping that you now will play a game," said Snenick mildly. "With me." The man goggled back at this small, black-haired interloper. "Game? What does that mean?" "Are you wrestling with just arms and hands here?" asked the troll. "So I think." Morgan did not remember everything his grandfather had told him about the troll folk, but he thought he would remember if they had been gifted with superhuman strength, or if they could grow back an arm once it was ripped off, as a lizard could grow a new tail. I mean Snenick," he called. "Why don't you come back to the table?" "Arm wrestling?" The big rimmersman laughed loudly and mimed with his bent arm. "Like this? There's not a man here who could best me, including any of that puny lot of yours." His gaze slid from Astrian to Porto and lingered on Sir Olverus, who was not quite as tall as old Sir Porto, but far more well-muscled. Then he spat on the straw covering the floor. "I am Lomsker the smith. I broke a bullock's neck with my hands when I was but a boy. I won't waste my time on any of your friends." He scowled at Morgan, who edged back a bit farther on the bench. I don't want the Duke's men to put me in chains for troubling that cream-faced boy. So go back to your foul mountain, ice goblin, before I throw you there." Several of the others laughed and cheered, but one warned, "Well, Lomskur, that's the High King's heir." The big man snorted. "I'm not troubling his very highness, am I? It's his lapdog that's troubling me." "Canuck are not dogs for anyone." Little Snenick wasn't smiling anymore. "Is this meaning that Lomskur is feared to hand wrestle with me?" "You?" The bearded man was genuinely astonished, but it seemed to make him even angrier. "Look at you! I could use you to pick my teeth." "No, just hand wrestle." The troll vaulted onto the bench beside Lomskur with surprising nimbleness and extended his arm. "Here, now." Lomskur's friends and acquaintances in the alehouse were all shouting, most in favor of crushing the troll on the spot, but the bearded man stared at little Snenick's outstretched hand. "For true?" he frowned. "No tricks? I don't want to get a troll knife in my gorge when I only came in here to pass the time. No tricks, on the honor of the prince." Snenick kept his arm out. Morgan started to rise, but Astrian reached out and grabbed his tunic, holding him back. "Let it be, Highness," he said softly. "Do not spoil the joke, whatever it may turn out to be." Lomskur turned and straddled the bench to face the troll. It took a while. Each one of the bearded man's legs looked as wide as a normal man's waist. Finished positioning himself, he thumped his elbow down on the table, making the crockery jump. The troll did not sit down, but knelt on the bench opposite Lomskur so that he could rest his elbow and still reach the other's hand. The difference in their size was so great that the Rimmersman had to grasp the small man's hand at an angle, with his arm low to the table. The troll's hand almost disappeared inside the Rimmersman's grasp. The bearded man suddenly began laughing. "You are no coward, I see. If you live, little snow beetle, I will buy you a pitcher, all for yourself, to wash away the pain." Snenick nodded, still not smiling. "And the same I will be doing for you, if you live." Everybody in the place seemed to be watching now. Even the ostler had come out from the back room and stood worriedly wiping his hands over and over on a dirty cloth. "Start!" yelled one of Lomskur's cronies. It should have been over in an instant, and nearly was. With a scowl on his red face, Lomskur bent little Snenick's arm until the back of the troll's hand quivered just a finger's breadth above the table. Most of the Rimmersmen in the alehouse were so certain of the outcome that they dared not turn away to take a drink, certain they would miss the ending, and instead fumbled blindly for their bowls. But Snenick did not collapse. He made what looked to Morgan like a few small adjustments of his knees and back and shoulders, and although Lomskur leaned far to his left to keep the pressure on, somehow the very small man withstood it. Snenick shifted again and pushed his elbow closer to Lomskur's, and for some reason the tiny change of angle brought an expression of discomfort and surprise to the big man's face. Moments became longer moments. The faces of Lomskur and little Snenick settled into fixed masks of effort. Every time it seemed the much bigger man must finally overcome the resistance of the smaller, the troll moved again. Never more than a little, but always enough to keep the giant on the other side from being able to force his hand down against the table. The spectators were beginning to worry now, not so much at the incredible spectacle of a troll holding off a man almost 3 times his size, but over the notion that a trick must be involved. Some shouted to look under the table, that the little man was bracing himself in some way, or being otherwise helped to cheat. But of course Morgan and the rest hadn't moved from their own table, and Snenek's legs were still curved beneath him on the bench. The whole thing seemed a sort of magic, and more than a few of the drinkers looked around with superstitious alarm, as though the sequel might be a Norn raiding party or a dragon or some other legendary menace crashing through the door. At last, and to the complete astonishment of everyone, Morgan and his friends most definitely included, Lomscoor began to tire. Sweat coursed down his face and dripped from his beard, and his face turned the color of a baked Edenmanza ham. Little Snenek began to lean back, slowly pulling Lomscoor's hand toward him, increasing the angle of their mutual grasp, until the big man's entire arm was stretched only inches above the tabletop. Then, with almost no warning, the troll twisted his wrist sharply to one side, and Lomscoor let out a bellow of pain. A split instant later, the back of the Rimmersman's hand was pressed against the tabletop. For a moment, the room went silent. Lomscoor was clutching his wrist in too much pain to say anything. Morgan and his fellows were too startled even to cheer. "By all that's holy," said Astrian wonderingly, "why did I neglect to wager on this?" As Lomscoor squeezed and chafed his aching wrist, little Snenek dropped down from the bench and walked to an ale cask that stood beside the ostler. A couple of large stone tankards had just been filled for someone else and then left on the cask until their foamy exuberance subsided. The troll pulled a coin out of his hide jacket and dropped it onto the barrel top, then took a tankard in each hand and walked back to Lomscoor's table. He held one out to the big man, who looked up at him with reddened eyes and an expression of utter bewilderment. "I was promising to buy for you an ale," said little Snenek. Lomscoor goggled at him for a moment. Then his already red face became even more inflamed, as if he were a baby about to howl, and he lashed out, knocking both the ale tankards out of Snenek's hands. "Cheat!" he roared. "Little devil! I don't know what trick you played, but—" Without finishing his sentence, he swung a huge fist at Snenek's face. The troll dropped beneath the blow so neatly that for a moment Morgan thought the little man's head had been knocked cleanly from his shoulders. Lomscoor swore loudly and tried to drop on him. Morgan had no doubt that if he did, no trick in the world would save the troll from being crushed to death, but Snenek had already somehow rolled out of the way, grabbing the handles of the two overturned tankards as he went. Lomscoor, on his knees, seemed to have lost the use of words completely. He snarled and swung, but Snenek kept dodging. Lomscoor grabbed a heavy bowl from a table and flung it at him, but the troll simply ducked. Now the Rimmersman clambered to his feet once more, roaring like a wounded bear, but something glinted in his hand. "Where?" Morgan shouted. "He has a knife!" Many of the customers nearest the door decided this would be a good time to leave, but the rest of the crowd seemed unable to move or look away as the huge man swiped at the troll with a long, crude-looking blade. None of Lomscoor's friends or fellow Rimmersmen made any move to stop him, although they could hardly be blamed. At first little Snenek simply backed away, but he was beginning to run out of room. Lomscoor, despite his lumbering, clumsy steps, was steadily backing the troll into one corner of the room. Even using the two heavy mugs as shields would not protect Snenek when that happened, the prince knew, and for the first time he realized what kind of utter disgrace he would be in if something happened to one of his grandfather's troll friends. The bearded man's blade lashed out and cut through the troll's jacket. Morgan thought he saw blood. "Enough!" he shouted. "Put up, man! The heir of the high throne commands you to lay down your weapon." But Lomscoor, if he even heard, was too far gone in rage now to care about princes. Someone ran outside and began calling for the city guard, but Morgan felt certain no soldiers would arrive to end this before someone was hurt or killed. "Astrian! Olvarus!" he shouted. "Help the little fellow!" "It is his fight," Astrian said. "He challenged the man." "But the man has a knife." "Even so," Astrian had not taken his eyes off the fight. "It is you we were meant to protect, my prince, not any troll who wanders down out of the mountains." Frustrated and frightened, Morgan was about to draw his own blade and try to even the odds, but he never had the chance. The next time the big man jabbed the knife at him, little Snennig did not duck or dodge again, but instead brought the two mugs together and hammered Lomscour's hand from either side. The big man dropped the blade, cursing loudly, blood suddenly welling from his knuckles. A moment later, the troll flung himself down at Lomscour's feet and crashed one of the heavy stone mugs against the Rimmersman's kneecap. With a howl of agony, Lomscour collapsed. He did not try to rise again, but rolled back and forth, screeching and holding his leg. "I was only buying him an ale because I made a promise," said little Snennig with a distinct tone of irritation, then brought the other tankard around in a wide arc and slammed it against Lomscour's temple. The big man dropped on the floor like a sack of grain and lay silent. Suddenly, Rimmersmen were rising all over the room, but Morgan didn't think they looked as if they were coming to congratulate the victor. Snennig calmly backed toward Morgan's table, a move that the prince did not approve of much because the angry crowd was following him. Morgan wondered whether these unhappy people remembered that he, Morgan of Erkenland, was the heir to the high throne. He hoped so. "Enough! Stand back!" Astrian sprang up, and his sword rang as it slid from his scabbard. "Back, you northern scum! I will gut the first one of you who takes another step toward the prince." However drunk he had been earlier, the knight gripped his sword as steadily as a jeweler would hold his chisel over a large uncut gem. The people in the alehouse stopped short and watched him, silent and sullen. Astrian nodded at them, like a teacher pleased with his clever students. "Highness," he said in a pointed tone, "I suggest we take our leave of this establishment." "I agree with your suggestion." But as Morgan backed toward the door, he noticed that little Snennig still stood between their table and the disgruntled patrons. "You, troll, you'd better come with us." "I am being owed my copper back for those 2 ales," the little man said, frowning at the empty tankards he still held. "And I was not even given the courtesy of drinking mine." "Let it go," Morgan beckoned. "We are leaving. You should leave with us." Little Snennig shook his head in frustration, but set the tankards on the table and joined the prince and his friends. Porto and Olvarus had their blades out now, too. Nobody opposed them as they backed out into the narrow street and slammed the door behind them. "Goodness," said Sir Porto, "they have not changed much since I was a young man, these Rimmersgarders." "When you were a young man," said Astrian, sheathing his blade, "the Rimmersmen were still in the lost west." "But how did you do that?" Morgan asked the troll. "How did you beat that big lout?" The little man shrugged. "No tricks. It is like stick fighting. Balance, that is the story to tell. And another word that I am not knowing, but it means changing the strength of the pulling and the direction, feeling what the other man is doing. No tricks, no secret. With only a small effort, I can be teaching it to you. I have much to teach you, Prince Morgan. We will be famous friends." Morgan stared at him. "You keep saying things like that. What on the wide green earth are you talking about? We have only just met." "I am fated to be your companion, Prince Morgan." The troll nodded vigorously. This I feel certain to be true, and I have the blood of a singing man in me. That is what I will be one day, and because of it I have knowing of things." He bobbed his head again, as if this stream of nonsense had proved something. "Dear God, no," said Astrian, amused. "If you're his companion, the prince wouldn't need us any more. What would Olvers and I do for entertainment? But we will allow you a temporary apprenticeship in our noble guild, Sir Ogre's Bane, as long as you have enough of those coppers to keep us in drink. Do you approve, Olvers? Porto?" "What?" said Sir Porto. I beg pardon, your highness, but there are some men coming out of the tavern behind you, several of them. And is that the city guard they're waving to? Sadly, there are urgent matters that require our attention elsewhere," Astrian declared, and led them off into the dark streets. They had a long walk back to Elvritsala Castle. As he grew more sober, Morgan began to feel sickly certain his grandparents would hear about this latest fuss. Of course, by the time they did, he had no doubt it would all have somehow become his fault. "But what did I do wrong?" he thought. "Nothing. I tried to help grandfather's friend, the famous troll Binnywhatsit. Is it my fault he saddled me with a tiny madman?" The unexpected sight of the tiny madman lifting a skin bag and squirting himself a mouthful of some liquid chased Morgan's gloomy thoughts away. "What is that you're drinking?" Little Snenick held out the bag. "Try if you wish, Morgan Prince. I am, of course, preferring this to the weak ale the Crewhawk drink," the troll said. "Little more than weasel piss, that is being." Morgan lifted the bag and squeezed a long draught into his mouth. A short time later, Olveris and Porto helped him back onto his feet, to the hooting sound of Astrian's laughter. Morgan could not speak for a while because he was still wheezing and coughing, but when he finally could, he asked, still with a certain breathlessness, "What is that?" "Kang Kang," said little Snenick. "It has real goodness, eh? And when the brook is coming, the bilch, belch?" He laughed. "Oh, but it is burning like fire, like the breath of a dragon. A fine drink for a man's life, it is." The troll reached up and patted Morgan on the elbow. "Did you know that my grandfather was fighting beside yours at Seswadra, as Scythi call it, the famous battle of the frozen lake? My grandfather was killed there. But I am not blaming you for that, Morgan Prince." The troll patted him again, reassuring him. "Despite that sadness, we can be to each other friends. And now you are to be spending more time with me. You will be learning oh so many useful things." "Just remember always to bring your purse," said Sir Astrian, reaching out to try some Kang Kang for himself. "Thirst is an expensive mistress." Chapter 12, The Bloody Sand. Hang on, let me just check something here. And we still have no comments. I have no idea what that's about. Let's see if we can get this thing to come up again. Okay, there's okay, so before I go back to reading, I didn't get a chance to say hello, Andre. Hello, Andre. Hello, Jan. Hello, Stephen Bird. Hazel, Sandra, Kristen, I don't remember if I said hello. Yes, I did say hello to Kristen. And Rosalba. And there's Wouter, hello. And Raziel, or Raziel. You'll have to tell me how to pronounce that. And Janice Ann and Mark. And then it says, and four more. And I'm not sure who thems would be. Okay, so anyway, back to the story. Back to the tale. Chapter 12. Whoops. Come back. And you go away. The Bloody Sand. The morning sky seemed so bright between the branches, and the world so full of new sights and smells and sounds, that Nezeru found it hard to keep her attention on what was before her. The mountainside forest was shrill with birdsong. The colors, more shades of green than she had imagined existed in the world, seemed to crash against her eyes like the sea flinging itself onto the rocks of the shore. She had seen so much in such a short time since leaving Nakiga. First the plains and headlands that had seemed to throb with life, then the ship and the impossibly wide ocean, and now, on this island mountainside, the mad cacophony of colors, 1,000 different trees and vines crawling over each other to stretch toward the sun. It was almost hard for her to believe that it was all happening to her. A half-breed, perhaps the youngest Talon ever gifted with the Queen's trust. "Yes, see me now, father," she exulted. "At the order of the Queen herself, we seek the bones of Hakatri, brother of the Storm King." It was like a story, a new one, a tale whose ending she had not heard time and again. "You make too much noise," Mako, the chieftain, growled. "I hear your every footfall." The Queen's Talon, their guides from the village, and their translator, the ship's captain, had begun climbing again by dawn's first light, when the mortals could see. Mako was clearly disgusted at being delayed by mortal frailties, but the islanders had warned that the shrine, as the ship's captain called it, was guarded against strangers, and there was no way to tell them of the Hikidaya's arrival beforehand. As the sun rose higher, and Nezeru grew more used to the rioting greenery, the slopes on either side of the mountain trail continued to produce more astonishing colors. Crimson cup-shaped flowers like falling blood drops, great swaying banks of yellow mountain olive, and lavender-blooming heathers that clung to the slopes like a fur mantle, delighting Nezeru's eye. The singer, Saomeji, insisted on naming them all, breaking in on her pleasure to identify marsh marigold in wet ditches, moss campion and saxifrage, as if naming something added to its pleasure, or knowing was somehow better than simply seeing. The sun was still well short of noon when they reached the summit and what the mortal captain called the Place of the Bones, a large, low, circular stone house with a sod roof. Many more of the small brown people came out of the building to greet them, all of them males with shaved heads and wearing similar clothing, yellow and blue robes belted at the waist by colorful scarves. To Nezeru, some seemed no more than children, and it was these that watched the approach of the Hikidaya and their escort with the greatest curiosity. Then, as Mako and the rest approached the low front door of the building, a final small group came out, 2 shaven-headed men helping a third, who was the strangest, oldest mortal she had ever seen, his skin so full of wrinkles he might have been made of jerked meat. The Rimmersman captain stepped forward and made a long speech in the villagers' tongue that had the old man nodding and smiling. When the captain finished, the wrinkled old man replied at some length. "The head priest welcomes you," the captain explained. "He says he is very pleased that the people of the Bones have come to this place to pay their respects, and he wishes to let you know that he and his priestly ancestors have honored and cared for them for more years than the meadow has grass blades, and will do so until the sun falls from the sky." Nezeru understood now that this place was some kind of religious shrine, and that all these men and boys were either priests or in training to become priests, like order acolytes back home. But how had mere mortals become the stewards of Hakatri's remains? Mako was not one for decorated speech. "Tell him we will see the bones now." His abruptness caused more than a little consternation among the priests, but at last they led their Hikedaya visitors inside the building. A few hides, covered with swirls of paint, hung on the walls, but otherwise the large main room with pounded dirt floors was dark but for the fire pit in the center and the smoke hole in the roof. The place smelled of many things, mortal human bodies not least, but Nezeru could also detect sweet oils and the charred dust of flowers and plants, small offerings burned over many years, whose cloying scents had infused everything. The old chief priest said something, gesturing with his hand. "The fire always burns," the captain translated. "That way the sacred bones are always in the light." The collection of brown bones was piled in a shallow pit just beyond the fire, a skeleton neatly stacked with the skull placed on top. The bones were oddly pitted, filled with holes as though someone had attempted to make them into musical instruments, then put them aside again unfinished. The old priest spoke. "He says, 'Behold,'" the captain translated, "these are the bones of the burning man." His fellow priests made a kind of moaning sound, but precise and measured, as though part of a long-practiced ritual. "See the scars made by the dragon's blood," said Saumeji. He spoke quietly, but there was exultation in his voice. Nezeru, too, was awed to see the actual remains of Hakatri, the Storm King's brother. Hakatri the dragon burned, revered by both Scythi and Norns. Together, Hakatri and his younger brother, who would one day be known the world over as Inaluki the Storm King, had slain the black worm, Hidohebi, but the curse of Hakatri's unhealing wounds had driven him out of the lands of his people, and neither Zedaya nor Hikedaya had ever seen him alive again. Could these bones truly be his? Nezeru looked to Mako, but saw no doubts in the chieftain's expression. "These are what we came for," was all he said. "Mortal, tell the priest that our great queen needs them, so we will take them now." The captain stared at him, his bearded face so pale he almost looked like one of Nezeru's band. But I cannot say that," he stammered. "They will kill us." Mako looked at him with contempt. "It is possible they will try. No matter. Tell them." "Please do not make me say these words, immortal ones," the captain begged. "Tell them." The priests had been watching in apprehension, understanding something was wrong. But when the captain translated Mako's words, they cried out in agony. The old priest pulled free from his two helpers and limped forward until he stood between Mako and the bones. He raised trembling arms. His high-pitched voice was full of agitation and anger. But when the captain started to translate, Mako waved his hand for silence. "I do not need to know his objections. They are unimportant. The Queen of all has sent us for the bones of her kinsman. Tell the old man that his people have cared for them well, and they have the Queen's gratitude. That should be enough for them." But the captain had barely begun speaking when the old priest let out a cry of anguish, then turned and threw himself across the bones where they lay on their bed of sand, shielding them with his scrawny body. Mako stared at him, then looked at the other priests and acolytes, now shoving in through the door, their faces dark with anger. Mako had his sword in his hand so quickly that Nezeru did not see him draw it. A moment later it swept out, and the ancient priest's head rolled to one side. Before the severed neck had pumped twice, Mako used his foot to shove the body away from the bones so that the blood only seeped onto the stones and into the crevices between them. The old priest's comrades cried out in horror. "Singer,
Gather noble Hakatri's remains, Mako ordered. We return to the ship. Even as Sao Meiji hurried to comply, the nearest of the dead priest's helpers leaped at Mako with a shout of fury, only to be sliced through to the backbone by an offhand flick of cold root, the chieftain's witchwood blade. More priests began streaming into the temple house, screaming as if they had lost their minds, grabbing at the Norns with the clear purpose of tearing them to pieces. Keme immediately killed two with one thrust of his spear, spitting them like meat on a skewer. Some of those outside are running for help, Ibikai called from the doorway. Nezaru felt something tighten around her neck and yank her backward. One of the shaven-headed priests, small but wiry and strong, had pulled Nezaru's own bow across her shoulder and over her head and was now trying to strangle her with the string. She got one hand between the bowstring and her neck at the last moment, but the mortal had his knee in her back and was pulling as hard as he could. She was separated from the rest of her comrades by the swirl of attackers and could not get leverage on the string to loosen it, so she groped for her knife with her free hand and cut the string. As the bow fell uselessly to the floor, Nezaru spun and slashed through the priest's sack-like garment, opening his belly. He sagged, a look of surprise and disappointment in his suddenly mild eyes. 3 more dead priests now lay at Mako's feet, but he seemed almost oblivious to the grief-maddened mob. Nezaru, Keme, go after those who fled, he directed them. Do not let them reach the village or they will raise the alarm, and the rest will swarm us like ants. Sao Meiji, you must keep the bones safe as we go. We may have to fight our way down to the water. Rayu Atanara, Nezaru replied, the ancient phrase that signified, I hear the queen in your voice. She had to leap over one of Keme's fallen victims, who writhed in the doorway, trying to lift himself up with both of his arms gone and the severed ends gushing blood like a mountain cataract. Outside, Keme had drawn his bow. As Nezaru emerged from the building, she saw him let the first arrow fly. One of the fleeing mortal priests stumbled, fell, and did not get up. A scant moment later, Keme loosed a second shaft, and another escaping priest stumbled, then dropped. Only a few of the fleeing priests were still visible on the side of the hilltop Keme had already chosen as his field of fire, so she left them to him and headed after the others. She no longer had a bow of her own, just her sword and knife, but that only meant she would have to outrun them, something that should not be difficult for one of the Queen's death-sung sacrifices. Following them would be even easier. The scent of the escaping mortals hung in the air, animal clouds of terror and exertion. She sprinted swiftly down the slope, her feet barely touching earth, and ran down the first fleeing priest within 100 paces. He was mature and larger than Nezaru, but nowhere near as fit as a queen's talon. When he stopped to gasp for breath, he saw her coming, grimaced in resignation, and snatched up a large deadfall branch. From the way he held it, he was no stranger to a fight, and the last thing Nezaru wanted to do was to waste time trading blows with him, because she could smell another mortal farther down the hill. A long struggle with this one might allow time for the other to get to the village and tell his people what had happened. Blood of the garden, guide my arm, she prayed quietly, balancing her dagger. Then, before she was close enough for the big priest to swing his makeshift club, she let it fly. The priest dropped the branch and sank to his knees, clawing at the knife that now stood in his throat. By the time she had taken 3 more steps, he was on his face, barely squirming, his blood matting the grassy earth. Nezaru put her foot on his head and shoved it to one side, freeing a last rattling gasp from his torn throat. Then she retrieved her knife and hurried down the mountainside after her other quarry. And I think I'm going to stop there. Because that's where I'm going to stop. And also we're up at the top of the hour. So let me put in
A bookmark. A bookmark. Okay, well, I will assume, despite my inability to read any comments, that okay, good. It looks like everything went ahead. Yes, as we hoped it would. So, let me think. Anything else to say? Obviously, I'll be back tomorrow, which is really later tonight, if you consider this to be Sunday already, which I guess I have to. I guess. But the tyranny of time will not beat me down. Anyway, I will be back at 7 p.m. to read some more, and we will find out exactly what happened to the other quarry that Nezeru is chasing, which is a little bit different than what happened to the one that she just croaked with her knife. And yeah, I think that's about it. So, as I always do, I want to thank you very much for coming to join me and hang out with me. It's a huge pleasure. I will be back as mentioned, but until that time, until we all can join together or gather together again, take good care of yourselves, please. You are important. Take good care of your family, friends, and loved ones. They too are important. And keep an eye out for anybody else who may need help, because it's a tough world sometimes. And sometimes there are people who just need a little helping hand. And if we do this, and if we all do this, we will all get through this thing. Whatever thing. The whole thing. This thing, brothers and sisters, called life, as Prince once so aptly put it. So, thanks again. Peace, and I'll see you very soon. Ciao.